But as I say, it's John, it's 62 years.
Yeah. But the whole point is, it's all about what you can remember, not about... If you've forgotten stuff, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's about the things you do remember. What's he got in his...
That's in my study at home.
Oh!
This picture
talk us through this.
is in that Navy book. If not that one, dear, the other one. See, that was the official RM book, that. And somewhere, my aunt worked in a bookshop in the West End, many years ago, and while she was going through the books, she came across this one, and so she sent it to me because she recognised my picture in here. That picture there is that one there.
Can you just describe the picture to me?
Well, this was taken by an official RM photographer when we got in. I think we got into Tilbury on our way home, and ostensibly we were seen to be sewing a bar being any ship that was sunk. All submarines had a Jolly Roger, and the idea was that when you made a kill, if you sunk a merchant ship, it was a white bar. If you sunk a military ship, it was a red bar. And if it was an uncertain sinking, it was showed as a broken bar. So there was a crack in the middle that it was not confirmed sinking. You also had, you can see it better here, you can see a couple of broken ones there. That's where the old man wouldn't confirm that he'd sunk them. All these stars are gun actions, and you see the cross guns. Sometimes a vessel was so small it wasn't worth putting a torpedo into it. We were just a kayak, for instance, that was taking supplies to the Greek islands. We would surface and put a couple of rounds into it and sink it. Now, although they contained a women crew, one or two of the V-boats that came up latterly when I was in the Med were surprised when a small few-pounder gun came back at them from a kayak, which soon sent them back down again. In fact, one of them was very seriously damaged. So it wasn't being unhuman to sink a kayak because they had the firepower. It was like in the First World War they had Q ships. A Q ship was a vessel that was ostensibly a merchant or a peace ship, and you surfaced, and all of a sudden a hatch came up, and a gun came, 4-inch gun, was firing shot at you. And of course, a submarine, unlike a lot of vessels, has got about 1.5 inches, 2 inches at the most, of plating. That's like an eggshell. It's nothing to a high-power bullet these days would go through that. But so you were very vulnerable to anybody's gunfire in a submarine. Anyhow, that's merely a picture in there. Let's just say, my Auntie Gert saw it and she recognised, of course, these were our officers. The old man, Captain Piper, I'm fortunate to still be in touch with his son. His son, a first-class chap, is Aston Piper, and he lives in Kintbury in Berkshire. And we got in touch with one another because, well, he knew that I served with his father and invited me into his home, and I was fortunate to see all his medals, his 3 DSOs, 3, and his military, his naval gear, and it was great. This chappie runs, he was a sub-lieutenant on the Unsparing, and he runs a stud farm now in Guildford, just outside Guildford. Anyhow, I'm digressing, I think. But, I'm fortunate, as I say, I'm in contact with Captain Piper's son, and he's a jolly nice chap, as was his dad. His father I worshipped, because there were lots of young captains of submarines who wanted to get a reputation, as is understandable, but the old man, Piper, he got a reputation, but it wasn't at the risk of his crew. He did it he did it in his own way, and that's why I'm here today, because he was a good skipper. But I don't know where I'm going from here.
That's right. I'm going to take you right back now.
What?
I'm going to ask you... No, that's great. I'm going to ask you why you joined in 39 or whenever you joined.
I volunteered for the Navy in 42 before I was 18 because my father was in submarines in the First World War. And he, as I say, I'm absolutely thrilled at looking at this because...
Could you describe what... Because I'm going to have my voice cut out, so you won't ever hear me. So, what are you looking at? Tell me what you're looking at.
Well, I saw that Dad was... I know Dad was in general service. Apropos, he was in surface vessels, destroyers and battle wagons and all those. Boats are submarines. They've always been known as boats. But Dad, I see, he went to Dolphin in the 13th... Well, I can't see what year this was. Oh, God, 1917. He joined Dolphin. As it's always at Gospel... God, it goes back from all those years. It was known then as HMS Dolphin. And then the Adamant was a submarine depot ship. It was in this last war. And then he's back to Dolphin. He was on the H... I was one of the H boats. He was on the H-43. And God, how he survived being on a K boat, because they were real killers for the crew. I suppose to try and make a boiler, hard fuel-driven submarine was meant to be a good intention, a good idea. But in reality, to cool the ovens down and in the event of an attack, it was ridiculous. You were taking 15, 20 minutes to get the vessel down at least to periscope depth, whereas in wartime practice, a US class submarine, a T would take a bit longer because it's a much bigger. An S class, our class was about 600-700 tons, but a T boat was double that tonnage. So obviously it takes a bit longer, but we could get down in minutes, and I mean minutes, and God forbid the sub that couldn't get down in minutes because, well, you'd be a goner. But yes, Dad was in boats, so in 42 when I volunteered for the Navy, and I only volunteered because I didn't want to go in the Army, and I knew if I was not quick enough, when the call-ups came, as the call-ups were about in those days, I could have gone in the Army or the Air Force. So I volunteered for the Navy, and of course got accepted, and immediately volunteered for submarines. Now, going into submarines, although in the early part of the war you volunteered, there came I think it was in late 43, people were detailed. You were in your mess in, say, R&B Portsmouth or in Dolphin. Oh, no, it was before I got to Dolphin. And the chits would come on the mess table each day, and a guy would see that he's got a detail to report to HMS Dolphin. And that already immediately tells you that you're going into submarines or submarine training. Now, it wasn't as bad if you were getting on in years, and when I went through on my training course, there was a chap, and he was about, I think, 32 or 33. Now, that was old for a submarine rating, because we were mostly 19s, early 20s, and we went in the DSCA tank. I remember this chap. We all went in there was about 6 of us in the DSCA.
What's the DSCA tank?
The Davis Safety Escape Apparatus. It's a tower at Dolphin, and it really is a long tower. I think it's about 60 or 70 feet. At the bottom of the tower is a separate chamber with a glass door that observers can see into the chamber before you lift the hatch. What happens, you sit in this chamber, water is pumped in until the pressure equals the pressure of the water in the tank above. You're wearing the oxygen mask, which is clipped under your mouth in your teeth, and a clip over your nose, and you have the apparatus includes a little rubber apron. And the water is then flowed into the compartment, and an officer, in my case he was a commander, he looks in the window at any sign of a problem with anybody in the chamber of claustrophobia. And some people have got claustrophobia and they don't realise it until they're in that situation, and then all the fears come. And when the chamber was flooded, this poor chap, he was panicking. He was really flapping. And immediately they deflooded it, drained it out and pulled the fellow out. The point I was making is, although you got a detail from your barracks to report for summary, it wasn't obligatory. If you showed you were funking in any way, medically that is, not in any humanitarian way, you would not be put in submarines, because anybody would realise if you'll blow the top in a test, what would you be like when you're under depth charges and all that sort of thing. So you then, of course, when they flood the chamber, you then lift the upper lid, but you don't call them, you could just call it a lid. You lift the upper lid and you float to the surface holding your rubber apron out so that you don't go up too quickly. Because if you go up too quickly, you know the consequences, you get the bends. So you use this rubber apron and up you go to the surface, and then when you get up top there, and it seems an eternity, although it's only about 60 feet, but it seems a heck of a time, and you get up there and somebody pulls you one side. And as I say, it's at that point where if anybody has got any weaknesses, it will show when they're looking through and seeing how you're behaving, because water comes up above you like this and you think, Jesus, I hope this oxygen's going to work all right. But you're under observation. So that's the early part of the test.
Did they remove the oxygen for you when you went up?
No, you kept the oxygen. Yeah, you keep that on all the way up to the top. But as I say, I volunteered because, you think, well, what, if my dad can do it, I can do it.
What stories did your dad tell you about the submarines?
Let me see. Dad, I know he said that the K-boats, and Dad wasn't a very talkative or demonstrative in his activities. Not at all. But I know he always said to me that he didn't like his spell on the K-boats. He said they were not good news at all. But he was always telling me of the brotherhood and the friendship that devote. When you're living in a tube space, the seaman's ratings mess in a submarine is usually in the fore ends. We call it the fore ends, where the tubes are. And when you've got 30 or 40 men living in a tube space for 3-4 weeks at a time, you get to know their every breath, their every hiccup, what girlfriends they've got, and don't say to him, I hear you're having trouble with your girl or your wife. You know everything emotionally that you mustn't do, and you get to know people in depth. So it has that effect on you in later life, when not to say anything and when. But the brotherhood that you get is great. Unfortunately, before we went to the States recently, about 2 months ago, I attended the funeral of our signalman rating on the Unsparing. Old Vivian Bentley, he died. And I went to his funeral, and he had a very good turnout. Well, he was the chap who, in fact, was responsible for sewing these bars on, not us three. Bentley used to sew and he kept the Jolly Roger. When the ship broke up, when we came up for leaving the ship, the submarine rather, he took the Jolly Roger with him. And when I went to the funeral, his wife said he'd given the Jolly Roger to his son, who would keep it. And I met the son, and he said it is in safe keeping. Now, that might sound a little bit silly, but it meant a lot to us in those days. And, he was responsible for putting the bars on, and that was it.
Is he in this photograph?
No. Bentley...
You're not in this photograph.
That's me.
That's you, on the left.
That's me. These... I'm looking for Bentley. Where? Because Bentley was their communications rating, and he was always dashing from the shore dolphin or to report signals back to the old man. I can't see Bentley there. No, I can't see Bentley there. No, I can't. I can't see him.
So anyway, so your old man didn't say much about submarines, but suffice to say you thought it was the best option of the three.
I thought he thought it was the best option. He said the camaraderie was great, and of course, important in those days, the money was better. You see, you got what they called hard layers money. For every night you spent sleeping in a submarine, I think you got about £1, or less than that possibly. And then you got an extra sum for being in submarines, being in the submarine service. So it was, and of course a few shillings in those days was quite considerable. But it was Dad's image and fact that he was in subs that made me volunteer, and I must say I never regretted it.
Did he have any stories that he told you apart from the Calamity K class?
No, not that I can recall. He had some pictures of old submarines, H-boats, a couple of K-boats that I sent to the Submarine Museum years ago, and I had an acknowledgement. And I don't think it was the commander who's in charge of the museum now. I don't think he was there in those days. It was another man. But anyhow, they acknowledged receiving them. They might have got lots of pictures from... but these were all First World War. Nothing to do with the last two. These were pictures of submarines and crews, such as these, from the First World War. But no, Dad wasn't. I know he didn't communicate an awful lot. Probably I'm making up for it today for him. That's it.
So you joined in 42.
Yes.
And what was your first posting?
First posting, I joined a troop carrier up in Liverpool. Good God. And then we went out, we went out way out in the Atlantic before the boat came back again. That was to avoid detection. And we finished up at Beirut. We stopped one night in Portside, and a couple of poor women nurses got killed there. But then we went on to Beirut, and we had a base in Beirut, Syria, or the Lebanon, in those days. And I was spare crew, what they call spare crew. I went out as spare crew. And then within a month or two, there was a rating went sick, I believe, on the Unsparing. I was an ST.
Right. I'll back up a little bit then, and I'll say, perhaps you could, for the microphone, so we got it perfectly, give us your name and what your rank was and what you were trained as.
Well, my name is Edmund John Brampton Howes. I'm 82 in a month or two's time. I wasn't sure what else you wanted me to...
What were you training as?
Yes, I was. I wanted to be on the electrical side of in a submarine, and I trained and became an ST, a seaman torpedoman. That's the first step. I was not even an AB in those days. I was what they call an OD, and you can't get much lower than that. But I was an ordinary seaman torpedoman. Eventually, I passed and did my exams for an LTO. And
LTO.
Now, an LTO is a leading torpedo operator. And strangely enough, when you become, or on the Unsparing, when I became an LTO, instead of remaining in the torpedo section of the boat, I went in the motor room. And you operate the knife switches. Because unlike German submarines, when you bring in power or decrease power, they used a big wheel. You sat in a seat, and the motorman, I think they call them, sat and brought the power in by a wheel. Whereas in our submarines, you had a series of switches. and you would throw the switches up or down in order to bring the power in as instructed by the captain.
We're talking electric power here.
Electric.
So we're talking when submerged.
When submerged, yes. Oh, yes, quite. When submerged, because surface-wise, you're on your diesel engines, or as they called them in those days, diesel electric, because you had the one shaft running through, and to charge your batteries up when you went on the surface.
So, how? Yeah, have a sip of coffee, and I'll ask this question. How long could you remain submerged for on your electric power before you had to go up on the surface to recharge?
Well, it's a bit flexible, because if you conserve, if everyone sat doing nothing, not running about, walking up and down the boat, and as is indeed we were trained to do, if you didn't move, it's not uncommon for a sub in those days to stay down up to about 20 hours. It wasn't fun, but because the air is getting pretty thick. But the least you move, the less oxygen you're using up, the less you talk, the better it is. But we've been down, I think, probably 16 hours at a time. But I think you could do 20. And again, the bigger the boat, the more air you're containing. But the S's, the V's and the U's were all fairly modest size. And I think originally they were trained as coastal submarines, probably doing harm off of Norway and more inland. They eventually finished up out in the Med doing much longer patrols than they, I think, ever intended for. I mean, there was a Polish submarine, I think it was called the Zokol, entirely manned by Poles, and they had a couple of fish left, torpedoes left in the boat, and they refused to come home until they'd used and found what they could. At least the captain did, and they stopped out. I think they did about a 28-day patrol. Now that was unheard of for that class of submarine, for you to stop out as long as that. 14 days, 18 days, that was a maximum. But they stopped out because they were so keen on vengeance for getting back at the Germans. But so then you were initially not even an AB. Oh no, I became an AB eventually, but that was the rank I left the service in, an AB LTO, leading torpedo operator. And as I say, after when I became an LTO, I left the torpedo space and the submarines and the torpedoes and went into the motor room, which was a bit cleaner. And it wasn't so heavy working.
So, at the first grade, you were in the torpedo room. Were you loading torpedoes?
Oh yes. The torpedoes lay in racks alongside the wall, and your bunk. You see, unlike the luxury of today is incredible, and deservedly so, of what they have in the modern submarines. They have proper bunk, real Dunlop pillow and all the rest. Ours were frames. Ours were tubular frames with a piece of canvas on them, and you put your bedding on them or your blanket, and you lay on them. And if you'd exhausted the tubes, we had 4 tubes for it. If you'd exhausted, the old man had spent those 4 fish, torpedoes. We kept calling them fish. If you exhausted them, you've then got to collapse your bunks in order to roll out on the rails the reload torpedoes, and they, on a block and tackle, are then pulled up into the tubes, ready for firing. And that was everything was turned upside down, which is your living space, your table where your tea pots and all whatever was all thrown to one side, so you could bring the fish out from the sides and poke them up the tubes. And as I say, it's so much different now. The crew's quarters are not disturbed. when you've got to reload fish, it's entirely different.
So how many fish did you fire?
Oh, in all, oh my God!
When you were actually in the torpedo room.
Oh, in the torpedo room. Oh, I should think at least 20, 25 that the old man let go. And of course, sometimes, unfortunately, you missed. Because there's a lot of money going up the creek. But, yes, at least 20, 25 that I can recall.
And did you ever... Well, presumably you found out what the results of your...
Oh, yeah. You, invariably, in the same way as you listen with ASDICs to depth charges, so they listened, the ASDIC rating in the motor room, in the control room rather, would listen to the impact of that torpedo. And golly, he knew it. He could tell the old man straight away. We'd registered a hit. I think that was the ASDIC ratings job, to report straight away. And of course, hopefully, when you've done sufficient damage to sink the vessel, you then got out the way. And hopefully quick enough before any submarine chasers come after you.
So you never stayed to pick up any survivors?
No. The only time we ever picked up anybody was when we surfaced once when there was a small boat off of Crete where 2 Germans were deserting. They were deserting from the German army, believe it or not, and we took them on board. And we eventually returned them to Beirut, where they became prisoners of war. But we never took back anybody that. I mean, it wasn't done. We're very vulnerable, as I say. A submarine, once it hits the surface, its protection is zero from anybody with any small gunfire to sink the thing.
So, how often were you discovered and depth charged?
Oh, too often. Too often. It's inevitable that if you're going to get close enough to be positive of a hit, you're going to be, close. And hopefully it's not escorted. The ship you're going for is not escorted. But, of course, if it is, then you've got to be prepared. And the old man, Captain Piper, it was his belief that he never dived much beyond 60 feet when we were being attacked. Because, and if you think about it, the deeper you go, the more vulnerable you are to a depth charge. Say, if you're depth charged at 60 feet, you could withstand that if it's only, say, 100 feet away. But if you were at 100 feet and you were depth charged and it went off at 60 feet, you could be severely damaged. So it was his theory that if you could get away with it by going at 60 feet, you were better off than diving deep. Now, submarine captains perhaps would vary. They think perhaps if you got very deep, the detection by the submarine chasers above wouldn't be so good. But the only time we went to any great depth, and that was we used to go to, I think, about 120, 140 feet. When we went up to the Aegean from Beirut or Malta, we used to go through what they call the Straits of Kythera. It was another island, Kythera Island. And there was a supposed or an alleged minefield there. And the old man used to go, and it was common practice for all our squadron of submarines to go deep. We went deep there because we suspected there, and in fact there was an occasion where we all swore we could hear a cable trailing along the length of the sub from a mine that was, located above us. So that wasn't very charming, that wasn't. But that was the only times that the old man ever went deliberately deep. And as I say, I prefer that way myself, because when a charge went off, and they sound for all the world like someone's fired a gun in your ear. If it's fairly close, it's very deafening because, as I say, water is a solid communication of sound, and it just amplifies. That's why any two submarines operating in one in one billet and one in another, when you got back, you could be 20 miles apart, but when you got back, you could say to the other sub, you had a fair old pasting, and you could tell them exactly how many depth charges they had, and likewise they could tell us how many we had. So it's amazing how the volume, the sound, is so amplified.
So, can you tell me you have a sip of your coffee. You told me a story about a tin of boiled sweets. So just explain to me the story of the tin of boiled sweets. Well,
the captain, bless his heart, he used to send round a tin of boiled sweets. They were doing nothing. No, they weren't exotic Suchard chocolates. They were just boiled sweets. And he used to get... We had a rating.
What was the purpose of the boiled sweets?
Well, the idea was that if you go give him something to suck and chew on or suck away, it took your mind off of what was happening, what was happening above you. It was a distraction. And the mere fact that Daisy Adams, we called him, he was a stoker. He also did work as a, we called them flunky. He did waiting on to the officers from their food from the galley. And I'm sorry, I'm off.
Daisy.
Oh, Daisy Adams. He came from Stepney. I don't know, he's probably not alive now. But Daisy used to bring the tin of sweets round, and just we expected them, and we'd take one out from him.
And this was when you were being depth charged.
Well, when we were getting I don't use that word. When we were getting a pasting, and there was occasions when if one came very close, perilously close, Daisy would stand there with her chin having a little shake, and it was noticeable. And I know the TI or one of the petty officers used to scream out, "Somebody take that tin off of Daisy," before he tells everybody where we are. Because the mere sound, because when you're being depth charged, it's standard procedure to take the wheel spanners off the wheels above you, the water control valves, anything that's movable or droppable, and put it on the deck in a piece of cotton waste, a rag. We used to call it cotton waste. And you put it on the deck so that if there is a vibration, a shaking of the boat, it won't drop down and cause the people who are listening above to detect you. So you've got to be deathly silent. And this, as I say, it was amusing. Daisy, bless his heart, he was doing this job, but he was kicking up a bit of noise with it. But it was...
so tin rattling wasn't the best thing?
Oh, no noise at all. And in fact, you got a real rollicking from your colleagues, not alone the officers or the old man, if you did anything that created a noise for the people up top. So it's when I think it's the word silent service comes in.
So, did you ever get a look through the periscope at any of your kills?
No, never. No, I didn't. No, unfortunately, I wish I had. But the skipper, before he joined, took command of the Unsparing, he was officer on other submarines, and he got some of his awards for his activities on them. But we sunk a Siebel ferry off of Crete. It's a German vessel which used to contain troops going backwards and forwards to the different islands and back into Piraeus, the port of Athens. And the old man put a fish through one of them, and it was full of troops, and they all floundered in the water. And then he waited until a couple of our boats came out from the Kenya harbour, and he promptly sunk one of them as well, after it had collected all the troops on board that he'd come to pick up. So that's war. That's what it's all about. But we got a bit of a pasting from our boat on that deal. They weren't very happy about us. So, yeah, we got quite a few charges from that little escapade.
And so we've got here some pictures of... Presumably this is the Unsparing.
That's the Unsparing.
From the conning tower?
From the conning tower. We're coming home. Yeah, we were coming home. And we were in escort with some other ships. And the unpleasant fact of being in convoy with other vessels, a submarine is virtually like a bottle. Its movement in the water on the surface is pretty vigorous. You roll and roll and roll. And the trouble, if you're attacked by air at all, you can't dive, because once you dive and then surface again, you're fair game for any escort vessels to come over and have a go at you. So it wasn't the done thing to dive when you were in escort with other ships and got other frigates or destroyers escorting you back home. So yeah, the surface in a submarine of that type was not a happy thing when the weather wasn't so good. But, you know, there are times when you pray you could go down, because if you only got to periscope depth, which is about 28, 29 feet, it's relatively calm. It's amazing how the turbulence falls away once you get to periscope depth.
Well, unfortunately, I guess if the swell was 20 feet, you'd...
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't...
Oh, no, you're quite right. This is... Both of these chaps, he was a stoker, he was a PO telegraphist. Both of these chaps are dead now, I do know that. But there you see the 4 tubes in the 4 ends. And there's a typical bunk, you can see it hanging down. That was what we lived and slept on. I used to have the lower bunk, and above me was a Scot, and he was fairly elderly to be in submarines, and he had a nasty habit, and I had to change bunks with him. I made him come on the lower bunk, and I went up top, because he used to find that getting to the toilet was a bit inconvenient, and I used to feel a drip, drip, drip coming through the canvas at times. So we'd swap. So we swap places. You don't want to know any more.
What other unpleasant things do you remember then?
Well, I think the worst thing was we were tied up in Malta, in Salima Creek. We were tied up on the inside, and there was another vessel tied up on the... I don't know what the name of it was now, but it was another sub tied up on the outside. And, of course, guys used to go ashore to have their drinks, and some used to drink excessively. And one guy came off one night, or two of them, one was all right. One came across our boat and went to go on the gangway across to his own submarine, and he fell in between the 2 boats. Now, that would have been all right if a ferry hadn't gone up the creek at the same time. And while he's in the water, the ferry set up a bit of a wash, and of course the boats came together, and he was in the middle of them, and that wasn't very funny. He was very badly injured, because you might say we should have had big enough fenders, but we didn't have fenders, and that was it. He fell in between the 2 boats, and the waves set up didn't do him a lot of good. But that was a very unpleasant. That was, unfortunately, that was due to the chap being in an alcoholic state.
So, what was your rum ration? Did you get one?
Oh yes, we got rum, but again, in the submarines, you used to get what we call neaters. You didn't get 2 and 1. In general service, in my day, of course they don't do rum now, but in general service, you used to get your noggin of rum was 2 parts water and 1 part rum, neat rum. But because water was rationed more in a submarine, we hadn't got it to throw around. You used to get it neat. Now, a lot of the guys, I did as well, used to bottle unofficially. We used to keep our neaters and bottle it and have it at the end. When we got back to harbour, then have a good time with our rum ration. But of course, you could even, if you could improve it even more by throwing a handful of raisins in your neaters, in your neat rum. It made it a very good drink.
I guess there are lots of raisins in the Mediterranean.
Yes, yeah.
What was life, apart from the camaraderie and the rather cramped sleeping conditions in the torpedo room? What were conditions like? What was the smell like? What was...
If you had,
heat,
it smells, but you get to not only ignore them, you just live with them. But when you first leave harbour to start your patrol, you were given some green vegetables. I mean, you could get greens or cabbage, but you quickly use them up. Because in no time at all, because of the confined space, greens smell pretty grim. So you get rid of any of the fresh food as quick as possible. And, of course, the rest of it is mostly tin stuff. It wasn't until the end of my time with the Unsparing that we got a proper cook. Submarines of our size didn't all have proper cooks. A rating used to do the cooking duties, but then we got a trained cook, and our one we had was a delegate. He was a pastry maker in civil life, and I think he came from Croydon, but he could make lovely bread, and of course while he was making the bread, that was great. But food, generally we got pretty good food in subs, even Malta when it was under siege, and eggs were gold. We got whatever good food there was for us submariners, and it was amazing what you could do. We used to get slabs of stuff. Well, it was like oxo, but it was minced meat, and it was all compressed. And you used to get slabs of this. And the cook, amazing, he would crumble them up, put 2 or 3 tins of tomato. We used to call it red lead. He'd put 2 or 3 tins of tomato on top of it, and then a couple of cans of beans, and then some mashed potatoes. And it's amazing what a good taste that can be when it's added to like that. But yeah, we were lucky with our cook. But
you talk of eggs and cabbage. I mean, surely flatulence was an issue with lack of exercise.
Well, yeah. The human body does emit some, but again, there's not much you could do about it. When you used to use the heads, which is the toilet, it's called the heads in subs, and ours was situated at the far end of the motor room. That's at the very rear of the submarine. And a guy would come along there before you could pass the control room. When you're going from 4 ends, the tube space, to the rear to use the heads, you got to the control room and you asked, if you're dived, that is, you asked the duty officer permission to go aft. In other words, to pass, because when you're dived, you have a trim, which one of the officers or the old man makes sure the boat is dead level for obvious reasons, so he's got more control and it's better manageable. But so when you went aft, they may pump a few more gallons of water from one tank to another to compensate for your weight going aft. So you'd go aft and you'd get, and the only privacy of the heads when you sat on this small compartment was just a little sheet, little bit of netting that came across, and most times you'd sit there and talk to the chap who's duty in the motor room, and of course you got some pungent odours coming through, but it's one of those things that you know that people don't set out to do it. And some people's bodily odours are better than others. You could almost identify them. But, using the heads was... Because there are stories that go of people that are using the heads and they use them wrongly. When you've done your function, you then close the lid and you open a valve to put a pressure of air into the pipes to send the stuff overboard. And again, permission to discharge the heads is always asked for before you do it, because if you're in really hostile waters, there's a series of bubbles goes up when you discharge the heads, when you blow.
So it was discharged directly after you'd done it?
Oh, yes, yeah. But there were stories that chaps didn't put sufficient air pressure and they got it blown up right back in their face. And you see, fortunately, we didn't get that. But I'd heard stories how some guys came in the control room with it covered in their own. Yeah, so it's that's the seamier side of living in confined quarters.
So you had to get on with your mates, really.
Very much so. And
what about humour? Much humour?
Yeah, yes. There's a fair some of the guys. There's now. This fellow Waddy Love, he had a good sense of humour. He's dead. There's so many of these chaps have passed away now. He's a Welsh telegrapher. But Waddy Love had a good sense of humour. Most boats have a comic on board. Yeah, most boats have a... He's just died in Canada. Good, yes, I heard of... This chap... This fella was a chief ERA. Now he did something, a feat which I'll tell you. He had a wager with his other engineering members of the crew that he would not eat for a week. He would live on beer. He would just live on drinking beer for a week. Well, he must have stored it up because he reckoned he won his wager. He didn't eat. Mind you, he was a big fella and he could drink heartily, but he reckoned he didn't eat for a week. He lived just on drinking beer. So there might be a moral in that there must be a lot of calories in beer.
Drink quite a big thing amongst the mariners, but amongst the Navy generally, really?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you've been confined and together after a couple of weeks or 3 weeks at sea, you obviously come in and want to enjoy yourself. It wasn't that you would reckon that might be your last patrol. I don't think one ever looked at it like that, although there was a time in the Med when we lost quite a number of submarines at one period of time. But, yeah, we all enjoyed a drink. I do remember one occasion... Oh, God, I'm glad I'm well past the age of getting punishment. But a sub came back from patrol, and you always unload your stores inland to take on fresh. And one of the little baskets containing the stone jar of rum was unloaded from the boat outside, brought onto our deck before taking it inboard to the stores. And one member of our crew whipped that wicker basket before it got transferred. And we had it in the sub for about a fortnight, enjoying imbibing on that before it was found it had gone missing. But anyhow, nobody was there. I think you ought to delete that bit.
Yeah, no one will know what it is. No one will know. Now, you told me that... So how long were you in the Mediterranean for? From 42 to 45?
And 42, we came home, I think, in 44. I think we came home in 44 because I was. Wait a minute. We went up to Sowerby Bridge when we came back from the Med. The crew went in two halves. In the wartime, it was commonplace for towns and small villages, or what have you, to adopt vessels. And we were adopted by this little place called Sowerby Bridge, or Sowerby Brig, as they call it up in Yorkshire. And they used to send us comforts. It was commonplace in the wartime. They'd sew you balaclavas and socks and gloves, and they do as much as they could afford to do. Well, we split up in two halves, and each half of the crew went up to Sowerby Bridge, and we were entertained by the mayor and the councillors and senior officials. And they did us proud. In fact, one of my first rugby matches was in the company of these guys up there. And then, of course, when we came back, the second half of the crew. But that was, as I say, I think they've still got our plaque. I know they have, in fact, in Sowerby Bridge, and I think it's in their library, of HMS Unsparing, which it was a gift from the captain, I think, for their kindnesses.
So did you spend the entire time, 42 to 45, in the Mediterranean? When you had leave, was it spent in the Mediterranean or you ship back?
Oh, no, we were in the Med. When we came home, I came back to Dolphin, and the war, when the war finished in 45, didn't it? When the war finished, within 2 or 3 days, there was 18 of us were detailed to go on a destroyer and go over to Oslo. The Germans were, I think, way ahead of us with this snorkel device of elevating a column above the surface, taking air from above the surface level and feeding the diesel, so you could propel your submarine along with the diesel engines, which were much, much faster than batteries, by sucking the air in through this snorkel column.
Would the exhaust air go up the same column out the back?
Yes, the exhaust was discharged, through another column. But the safety method it was meant to be was it had a ball that if a heavy wave or sea came over and blocked the column, this ball fell on the top to close up the air, and subsequently automatically was to stop the diesel running. But by the movement of the ball flap on top of the column, bringing the air down, it would stop the air coming. And of course, if you didn't switch your engines off immediately, that's kaput. Everyone would have the air sucked out of their body in minutes. But anyhow, we went over to Oslo. There was 18, I think, of us and an officer, and there were 2 subs tied up alongside the jetty in Oslo. This was only 2 or 3 days after the war had finished. So they weren't exactly happy at what we were about to do. Anyhow, we went on board. The sub we brought back was called the U-2502. I should always remember it. And when we went on board, there was a beautiful smell coming from the galley. Their cook, or whoever he would be, was cooking a goulash, and it smelled beautiful. But be that as it may, the officer in charge of us at that time, he said, "Don't touch it." He said, "They know we're coming." And much against our grain, we had to throw it over the side. And I think the German crew were more upset than we were. But anyhow, that was one of those things that it was a precaution, because they were very, very convinced that, and the sun shone out of Hitler's body. He was still a very good man for them. And when you looked at the stock of food they had in the sub, with the butter and cheese and whatever that they'd thieved from all the Low Countries, yes, they were doing fairly well. But we then crewed or attempted to crew, and this is where we learnt how much comfort they had, because these subs were designed for long Atlantic patrols, not the small patrols that we were doing. And of course their living quarters were that much better. In a British submarine, when you come to fill your batteries with distilled water, when you had to do it when they were below level, it was a monumental task. You had to lift up the boards, the deck boards, and if you were at sea and you had to fill you had a hose. You had a hose that you took around to top. It was a hell of a job. But in the German submarine, the batteries were on like 2 decks. So you went down into the compartment where the batteries were, and you lay on a trolley. You could lay on a trolley and with the wandering hose of distilled water, you could run along, pull yourself along on this trolley, on your stomach, and you could fill the batteries up as you ran along with distilled water. And that in itself, to me, was absolute luxury. I mean, they could top their batteries up with a minimum of disruption. And this, as I say, it was on board there that we eventually got on some form of communication. But these guys, they were very truculent, and they weren't happy at the war finishing.
Did you sail back with the 2052 or whatever it was, the
225
on your own?
No, to be honest, their layout mechanically was totally different to our subs, and we had to more or less be guided and directed. It would be completely untrue for me to say that we took over that sub. We didn't. We were helped and guided by them, and they knew it was their own salvation, because if they'd have shown, indiscipline of any great extent, they would suffer when they got to UK. But we came from Oslo, we came up to the top of Scotland to Scapa Flow, and we tied up alongside a depot ship. It wasn't a sub-depot, but we tied up alongside a depot ship that had a cinema on board. And I remember we had got pretty friendly with the two guys in the motor room, because I was, as an LTO, I was put into the motor room, and this is where I learnt their power of operating the motors was on a wheel and not on knife switches as we used on the U-class. But we came friendly with these two guys, and me and a chap, I know all I remember, he came from Walthamstow, but we said, we'll take you on board the depot ship alongside and show you the film. You can sit with us and see this film. They'd already shown us where they'd hidden their schnapps, and that was in where the battery compartment was, so we'd enjoyed some of their schnapps.
But wasn't any acid then?
Oh, no.
Did they speak good English, or what?
Fair amount, yeah. They spoke. They were only young fellas too, but we took them on board this depot ship, and the film that was showing was called Arsenic and Old Lace. And I'll never forget, they kept on saying Juden, Jewish. And I suppose it was because produced or directed or not, I don't know. Anyhow, I thought, you pair of ungrateful terriers. I said, we brought you on here to give you the pleasure of seeing a film. And it was Arsenic and Old Lace. I'll never forget it. And all of a sudden, the lights went on this mess deck where the film was showing, and the POs were chasing everywhere, saying there's a couple of Germans escaped from the submarine alongside. And of course, I had to stand up and say, no, sir, they're not escaped. They're here. They're sitting here. And what was the? And I always remember the other guy who came with me. He didn't stand up, and I thought, you miserable so and so, you. I'm going to take the can back for this. Anyhow, we stood up and we went back up top, and we had to go in front of the commanding officer of this depot ship. The two Germans went back on board the submarine alongside, but the officer said, you know, what sort of game you're up to? Do you know what you're doing, taking these Germans, prisoners of war? And I said, and you know, I'm not a lower deck lawyer. Do you know what a lower deck lawyer is? Well, a lower deck lawyer is anyone that starts to quote the KRRs, the King's Rules and Regulations. So we used to call them lower deck lawyers. But all I could think of saying to this officer, the captain, was they're really co-belligerents, because they're bringing this sub home, we're merely helping them. They are actually manning the boat and to bring it back to England for you to examine and see what they've done with this snorkel apparatus. And, you know, with that slender bloody hope that it would give him a doubt or query, he let me off. So I went back on board. And of course, these two Germans, they were very, very unhappy. They thought the worst was in for them. And anyhow, it all blew over, and we took the sub from there to Lisahally in Northern Ireland, and then we left it, and I came back to England I think I came back on a destroyer. But I left the vessel up there for our bods to examine it, all this snorkel apparatus. But I don't know whether it was ever developed to any extent in British submarines. I don't think it was.
And did you... How long did you stay in the service for after that?
I came out within months, I think months of the war finishing. I went in as what they called an HO, hostilities only. I was not a long-serving man. My father served 12 years. He did what they called 7 and 5. He did, I think, 5 years, and then you signed on for... Oh, no, I did 7 years, and you signed on for a further 5. So he was a 12-year man. But I was only what we called hostilities only. And I did my stint during the wartime, and when, I think it was only a few months after the war finished, we were discharged. And I was given a demob suit, and that was it.
So you weren't... They didn't say, would you like to stay on?
I don't recall ever being approached and that being put. I think, no. I think, no, it never occurred to me to stop on. I'd left a company, and initially I went to a company when I was 14, because I left school at 14, which was not uncommon in those days, because circumstances being as they are, your parents hoping you could seek some form of income at an early age, which I did. But the person who I was responsible in the company who I worked for, he wasn't happy that I volunteered to go in the service, because he wanted my services at the company, and that was understandable. But I wanted to return to the company because I enjoyed working there. So I didn't see my future in the submarine service.
So no sense of the Cold War happening. It was all far too... You came out and that was it.
Oh, that was it. I didn't experience any of this unpleasantness of the Cold War, which came on. When was that? The Berlin airlift and all that business.
You were long gone.
Oh, I was long gone. Yes. It was years afterwards I joined the Submariners Association, because we have an association, and I used to go very often. I used to see the captain we had reunions at Dolphin at Gosport, but of course people of as I say, I'm 82, and there's a lot of people now passed away that was in boats in my day.
So generally, though, they were quite young, so a lot of them have obviously lasted quite well.
Oh, some of these guys must still... Well, it's fun. Every now and again, we exchange Christmas cards. That's the way of communicating with the old colleagues. And every now and again, I get a card from, say, the wife, saying, poor old so-and-so has passed away. And I knew they were a couple of 3 years older than me, because I was the youngest member of the crew. At 18 when I joined, I was the youngest member. But as I say, Bentley, Vic Bentley, I went to his funeral 2 months ago, and there was a chappie up at Sam, up in Durham. He was a fine man. I liked him immensely, and of course he's dead now. But there could be one or two who might still be alive. I really don't know.
Because the Unsparing was quite a new ship, wasn't it? It was basically brand new.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. It was the people commissioned it in England. I didn't pick it up until we got out to Beirut, and as I say, I was out there as what we called spare crew, and it was my good fortune that I went to the Piper's ship. Could have been one of the others that got lost during the war.
Is this you here?
That's me, yeah. Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid the uniform is not how it's often shown in Hollywood films. You can see, but all these guys, this is me there, that was our chief stoker. Dolly Round, his name was.
Why do you call people like Daisy and Dolly and all this?
I don't know. You got nicknames. I just don't know how these nicknames ever come along. I mean, a telegraphist is Sparks, a signalman is a bunting tosser, and bunts our signalman was only ever called Bunce. I don't remember anybody ever calling him anything else. And funny, when I went to his funeral way back, somebody, one of his daughters, had put a flag, and across it was the word "Unsparing," in memory of him. And I thought it was a nice gesture on their part. And I'm sure if the old man had been alive, Captain Piper, he would have cherished seeing that. But no, I didn't get involved in the Cold War, any part of it. That's me coming up out of the tube space, because in the fore ends, that's where you loaded your torpedoes. That's as you see one going down there. He was an Irishman. He was a strong fella, he was.
I guess you used some strong fellows for this type of... How heavy was your torpedo?
Pardon?
How heavy was your torpedo?
Oh, that's... let's see. That was a 21-inch torpedo. That would be at least a ton. That's a fair old weight to pull down into... Yes, I would say that was about a ton.
So you're using pulleys all the time and stuff?
Oh, yes, you use pulley and tackle.
Anything else you can think of?
I don't... No.
Your pa was a stoker.
Dad was a stoker. Yes, it's a misnomer to call a man a stoker, except on K-boats, because that was the only boat that carried you fueled with solid fuel. But in the submarine generally, the stoker was in the engine room where you used oil. But nowadays, I think the knowledge required by submariners is so great, and their technicians, because the submarines are so highly sophisticated. I would be lost. I would be useless unless I'd had their training. But they're rightfully they're technicians now, and they've all got different terms. And I noticed their flashes. Pardon?
Computers and it's...
Oh, God.
And nuclear and...
Yeah, exactly. Never been in a nuclear boat. We were supposed to go to them on one of the visits from one of the association meetings. Never got up there. But I've been on there's an A boat in the museum. I think is it called the Alliance? In the museum down at Dolphin in Gosport, there's an A-class submarine there. And I've been in that, and of course I'm amazed at the amount of room they've got in it. And this, I took our grandchildren. No, that wasn't Pete Lee's. We took our grandchildren there. And it was very, I must say, it's a first-class museum. And for anyone with any interest in the sea would love to go there. And the museum generally, going in the submarine, the little subs that were first brought about, it's excellent. And they've got an X-craft, the 1-2 men submarines there. But
yes. There was news recently of the one in Liverpool. There was a raised U-boat that they raised, and it was kept in Liverpool. And Liverpool decided to do away with the museum. And this rusty old U-boat that they raised from outside Norway has got no home now.
Oh my giddy aunt! So, well.
But that's probably the one. No, it wouldn't have been the one you brought back, because this one had been sunk by air attack and then raised and then brought back.
Yes.
That's it.
Well, I can't enlighten you anymore, I'm afraid.
You can't? These photographs are fantastic, I have to say. Just have a quick glance at that and see if there's anything that reminds you of your days in the Mediterranean, what you got up to. It says HMS Unsparing, torpedoes and sinks, the Italian tanker. Yes.
Yeah, I was on that in that time. I remember that. Yeah, 40. They had our boats, that's right. And their troop boats were called Siebel ferries. See, in the Aegean, it was very difficult to find anything of substantial tonnage. There was no big liners as such that you see going across the Atlantic. They were most of them were taking stores and supplies to the German troops on the Crete Islands.
were you protecting North Africa? Were you trying to stop Rommel's supplies?
Well, our time in the Aegean, it wasn't so much Rommel.
Rommel, isn't it?
Yeah, we were there to stop the supplies getting through to the Germans on Crete. Because that was a sad day in our history when they landed with air troops and took Crete. But we did take a couple or three of these commando guys up to the islands on one occasion, and they went ashore in the little canoes, little rubber boats, because they were to try and link up with. There were still troops, British and Australian troops on Crete, that hadn't been taken prisoner by the Germans, and the idea was these guys was to link up with them. I didn't envy them their task, but that was one of these what they called them commando runs. But
so did you didn't do many secret missions like that?
Oh no. Yeah, we did. Gunfire was frequently used up in the air because of the size of the vessels. But having said that, you had to be on your guard that they didn't open up and come back with a light but dangerous gun.
Good.
There we are.
Lovely.
I hope it's been of some interest to you.
The boys have gone wandering, I think.
I bet they have.
Yes. Lovely. Well, that's brilliant. Oh, there's a whole U-class book.
Yeah, it was actually Piper's son. Oh. Captain Piper said to me, this here
Daisy
was...
Adams, it said.
Oh, yeah, I thought, in case I forgot his name. But when the war had finished, we were taking... I came back to Newport in Wales to take the Unswerving, one of the young U-class, over... No, we were taking it down... We'd come from... Let me see, was it from Ireland? We'd come from Ireland, and it was to be broken up in Newport. This was the Unswerving. And in going across the Irish Sea, we started taking in water through the stern glands. We started taking in water, and 3 lifeboats came out, St David's Head, Aberystwyth and Fishguard. Those three lifeboats came out to take us off this submarine, the Unswerving. And they did take us off, and of course we thought the boat was going to go down. We tried all means we could. It didn't go down. And the next day, we the same crew were taken out to tow it back in to Newport. It was only to be broken up, but for some reason or other, it started taking water in, and we thought it was going to go down, and all the crew came off.
So obviously, Unswerving was a dodgy one not to be on.
Oh God, yes, that thing.
Did some boats have a sort of bad reputation for always being a bit of a disaster?
I don't recall Eddie being more. There was a no, I don't. Here, sorry, that was when we were leaving Malta to come home. We gave a little party, or the officers did, to some of the officers and wrens ashore. It was called Medway, that place was, I think. And this, believe it or not, was in the fore ends of the submarine. And we tarted it all up to make it a little more appealing. And, of course, we didn't do too bad with the ships we did sink. And the red was, of course, the naval military vessels. These were the gun actions. And beneath there is a picture of a little boat with 2 sailors in it, the 2 Germans, which we took back to Beirut. I don't know what else is in there.
Some nice stamps.
Yes.
When were the stamps done? What year were they?
They came with this.
Yeah, what year was that, I wonder?
Centenary of the Royal Navy Submarine Service.
Oh. It's got to be...
I don't know where I got them.
1992.
Yes.
Oh, no, 1992 was the Vanguard class.
What's this, for goodness sake? Unsparing Mulder, Salima Creek. Oh, yeah, there we are. That's in Salima Creek.
Oh.
But yes, the Captain's son, Aston, recommended me to read this book, and it's a jolly good read too. I enjoyed it. Whoops. But there's an article there about the Lieutenant Piper's escapade.
That was like an oil rig, though.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Or was it one of those funny towers out in the...
It was an island fort.
Yes, out by the east coast.
That's right. Yeah.
This is a fantastic picture. They're here with doing the Jolly Roger.
Yeah. That hangs in my study, and one of the kids have...
I have to get Lee to do a copy of that.
Okay.
That'd be lovely.